Overview for Ezekiel. Purpose. The book of Ezekiel was written to pronounce judgment on both Judah and surrounding nations, and to provide hope for the future Messianic kingdom and Israel. Author. Ezekiel, whose name means God strengthens, was a priest of Judah living in exile in Babylonia. Some Bible scholars suggest that the reference in the book's first verse to the 30th year alluded to the 30 years that had passed since Josiah's restoration of the temple in 623 BC. Other scholars believe this was Ezekiel's age when God called him into service. Nothing is known of Ezekiel's family except that he had a wife and his father was named Buzi. In 597 BC, Ezekiel was among the second group of Judeans taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar and deported to Babylon. The first group of captives was carried away in 605 BC and included Daniel. A third and final group would be taken in 586 BC. In the 5th year of Ezekiel's exile, he was called by God to be a prophet, and he served in that role for more than 20 years. There is no record that he ever returned to Jerusalem. Jewish tradition holds that Ezekiel was put to death by his own people because of his preaching. Time period covered. Ezekiel's prophecies are dated between 593 and 571 BC. Date written. Approximately 571 BC. History. Ezekiel lived in a time when crisis and upheaval characterized the Mediterranean region. Although Assyria had dominated the area for over 125 years, its power was in decline, and in 612 BC, Babylon conquered Assyria and became the major superpower. The Babylonians invaded Judah in 605 BC. Judah initially was a vassal state and maintained a semblance of independence by paying a substantial tribute to Babylon. However, King Jehoiakim discontinued payments, and in retaliation, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar sent an army against Jerusalem in 597 BC. Ezekiel, along with some 10,000 of the most prominent men of the country, were among those carried into exile at that time. The conquest that led to Ezekiel's captivity is described in 2 Kings 24, 12 through 16. In 586 BC, following the final revolt, the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem, and Judah ceased to exist as an independent nation. Many of the remaining people were taken captive to Babylon. Some fled to Egypt, and others stayed behind in the decimated land. The Israelites who stayed in their homeland struggled to survive, but most of those in Babylon had a degree of freedom. While some were enslaved or imprisoned, many were allowed to settle and live as they pleased in their new country. Ezekiel was among that number. Setting. The Chebar River, where Ezekiel received his prophetic commission, is thought by most Bible scholars to be a canal of the Euphrates River located southeast of Babylon near the city of Nippur in present-day Iraq. It possibly was a place of prayer for the exiles. The book of Ezekiel references this river 8 times. According to Ezekiel 3:15, the prophet's home was located in Tel Abib, where a great number of the exiles lived. Some of his prophecies were given from that location. For example, Ezekiel 8:1. He was married until the death of his wife, recorded in Ezekiel 24:18. The fact that elders of the people came to consult with him indicates that he was respected within the community of exiles. See Ezekiel 8:1, 14:1, and 20:1. Unique characteristics. Unlike other prophetic books, the book of Ezekiel unfolds in chronological order, beginning with the prophet's call to a prophetical ministry. Many of the subsequent visions and events he related are precisely dated. The prophet's messages are characterized by allegories, symbolic actions, and apocalyptic imagery, which would be vivid symbolic pictures or revelations concerning the end times. Though the subject matter varies throughout the book, its content is stylistically consistent. Ezekiel often made his points by using contrasts and the hammering effect of frequent repetition. He also employed parables as illustrations. 5 are included in this book. Summary. The book of Ezekiel contains 48 chapters and has 4 main sections. The first section, chapters 1 through 3, focuses on the call of the prophet. The second section, chapters 4 through 24, pronounces judgment on Judah and Jerusalem and was written prior to the fall of Jerusalem. Section 3, including chapters 25 through 32, is a series of messages of judgment against 7 foreign nations. In the final section, chapters 33 to 39 begin after the fall of Jerusalem and focus on Israel's restoration, and chapters 40 through 48 deal primarily with a new temple and a restored Israel in the end times. Ezekiel 1 through 28. Devotional focus verse. And above the firmament that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne, as the appearance of a sapphire stone, and upon the likeness of the throne was the likeness as the appearance of a man above upon it. Ezekiel 1:26. What's the most beautiful sight you've ever seen? Take a moment to consider and then try to describe its beauty. Do your words capture the awe you felt when you saw it? Several years ago, my cousin and I became lost as we were hiking and realized we would have to climb a mountain to find our trail. Cold and tired after our full-day trek, we decided to rest a while before going on. We managed to sleep for a couple of hours by huddling together and covering ourselves with branches to stay warm, and then resumed our climb. Around midnight, we ascended above the timberline, and spread out before us was possibly the most beautiful sight I've ever seen. A full moon sat on the horizon, and from our vantage point, it appeared to be below us. It cast beams of light across the valley that lay at our feet and on the mountains surrounding us. Blanketing the valley was a fluffy cloud. In the distance, moonlight reflected off the snow on great peaks that were partially shrouded in deep purple shadows. It was breathtaking. My efforts to paint with words the beauty I saw that night fall far short. I'm sure that's how Ezekiel felt when he tried to describe the vision he saw of God's power and majesty, as recorded in our text today. Still, a glimmer of the awe he must have experienced comes through. Ezekiel saw a whirlwind with a great cloud and fire in the midst of it. He saw 4 living creatures with wings who were guided by the Spirit of God. He saw wheels within wheels that were the color of gems and were also guided by the Spirit. Above all these things, he saw the likeness of a throne. Our key verse relates that the throne had the likeness as the appearance of a man above upon it. This suggests that Ezekiel did not see a face and a form that he could have drawn, but rather a blazing brightness with a human shape. Without doubt, words must have failed him as he tried to portray the details. What he was witnessing simply defied description. It's awe-inspiring to consider the sheer magnificence and splendor of Ezekiel's vision. His attempt at a description should kindle overwhelming honor and respect for God in our hearts. Though we likely will never see a scene like Ezekiel saw while we live on this earth, God can and will make himself real to each one of us. The same God who gave the amazing revelation to Ezekiel so long ago loves us. His love for us caused him to send his Son to die for us so that we can forever be a part of his family. Have you experienced the transforming power of God in your life? He has the ability to heal the sick, give hope to the hopeless, and transform a sinful soul. Words cannot adequately express what he is able to do, but you can experience him for yourself. Background information. Chapter 1 describes the place, manner, and purpose of Ezekiel's call and provides a summary of his first vision. God's purpose in revealing his glory to Ezekiel was twofold. First, it would provide the prophet with spiritual strength to impart God's judgments and prophecies. Secondly, it would give the prophet a vivid understanding of the magnificence of God's glory and his great holiness, which would be in sharp contrast to how far from God the rebellion and disobedience of the children of Israel had taken them. In verse 1, the phrase, "the heavens were open," indicates that Ezekiel began to see visions of God's glory, things not revealed to others. Ezekiel stated the precise date that this occurred. It was in the 30th year, the 4th month, and the 5th day of the month. Some Bible scholars suggest that the 30 years were a reference to Ezekiel's age when God called him into service. Alternatively, It may refer to the 30 years that had passed since Josiah's restoration of the temple in 623 BC. The Chebar River, where the revelation occurred, probably was Nar Kabari, Great Canal, a canal that emptied into the Euphrates River. This was the largest canal in a man-made system that watered the plain and made possible the transport of grain and other produce to the capital. Beginning with verse 4, Ezekiel first described a fierce wind coming from the north, the direction from which the Babylonian army would come against Jerusalem. A great cloud and the fire enfolding itself were symbols of God's presence, and the amber-colored radiating brightness was an expression of the glory of God. The four living creatures described in verses 5 through 14 were identified as cherubim in Ezekiel 10, 8 through 15. These bearers and guardians of God's glory had feet like divided hooves that were the color of polished brass. From Ezekiel's description, it seems that each cherub's head had 4 different faces looking in 4 different directions. Each cherub had wings on each of its 4 sides, 2 that were lifted and spread, and 2 that covered its body. These wings allowed the cherubim to move as one unit in any direction at lightning speed, not needing to turn. Bright fire moved from within the midst of the wings. These flashes of lightning were a visible manifestation of the Spirit that directed them. Verses 15 through 21 further describe how these cherubim moved. Each cherub had 2 wheels at its base, one within the other at right angles. These 4 spherical wheels appeared very tall to Ezekiel and were full of eyes. Bible scholars suggest they were emblematic of God's omnipresence and omniscience. In verses 20 and 21, the words spirit and living creature both refer to the Holy Spirit. The wheels' movements were directed by the Spirit from the midst of the fire, which in turn directed the movement of the cherubim. Verses 22 through 28 describe what Ezekiel saw of God's glory and the surrounding environment. The terrible crystal of verse 22 probably refers to prisms of light refracted through crystal, the area above the cherubim being like a rainbow in coloration. Above the wings of the cherubim was something resembling a sapphire throne, and above that, a form with the appearance of a man. Ezekiel's response to this vision was one of overwhelming awe. He fell on his face before God's glory. Conclusion. God's power and glory is beyond human description, but it can be personally experienced by each one of us.
Ezekiel Chapter 1. Now it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, in the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river of Chebar, that the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. In the 5th day of the month, which was the 5th year of King Jehoiakim's captivity, the word of the Lord came expressly unto Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Chebar, and the hand of the Lord was there upon him. And I looked, and, behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself, and a brightness was about it, and out of the midst thereof as the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire. Also out of the midst thereof came the likeness of 4 living creatures. And this was their appearance, they had the likeness of a man. And every one had 4 faces, and every one had 4 wings. And their feet were straight feet, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like the color of burnished brass. And they had the hands of a man under their wings on their 4 sides, and they 4 had their faces in their wings. Their wings were joined one to another, they turned not when they went every one straight forward. As for the likeness of their faces, they 4 had the face of a man, and the face of a lion, on the right side, and they 4 had the face of an ox on the left side, they 4 also had the face of an eagle. Thus were their faces, and their wings were stretched upward, 2 wings of every one were joined one to another, and 2 covered their bodies. And they went every one straight forward, whither the Spirit was to go, they went, and they turned not when they went. As for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire, and like the appearance of lamps, it went up and down among the living creatures, and the fire was bright, and out of the fire went forth lightning. And the living creatures ran and returned as the appearance of a flash of lightning. Now as I beheld the living creatures, behold one wheel upon the earth by the living creatures, with his 4 faces. The appearance of the wheels and their work was like unto the color of a beryl, and they 4 had one likeness, and their appearance and their work was as it were a wheel in the middle of a wheel. When they went upon their 4 sides, and they turned not when they went. As for their rings, they were so high that they were dreadful, and their rings were full of eyes round about them 4. And when the living creatures went, the wheels went by them, and when the living creatures were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up. Whithersoever the Spirit was to go, they went, thither was their spirit to go, and the wheels were lifted up over against them, for the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. When those went, these went, and when those stood, these stood, and when those were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up over against them, for the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. And the likeness of the firmament upon the heads of the living creature was as the color of the terrible crystal, stretched forth over their heads above. And under the firmament were their wings straight, the one toward the other, every one had 2, which covered on this side, and every one had 2, which covered on that side, their bodies. And when they went, I heard the noise of their wings, like the noise of great waters, as the voice of the Almighty, the voice of speech, as the noise of an host. When they stood, they let down their wings. And there was a voice from the firmament that was over their heads, when they stood, and had let down their wings. And above the firmament that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne, as the appearance of a sapphire stone, and upon the likeness of the throne was the likeness as the appearance of a man above upon it. And I saw as the color of amber, as the appearance of fire round about within it, from the appearance of his loins even upward, and from the appearance of his loins even downward, I saw as it were the appearance of fire, and it had brightness round about. As the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud in the day of rain, so was the appearance of the brightness round about. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell upon my face, and I heard a voice of one that spake,